So obviously firearms have to be stored out of the reach of children. They cannot be accessible to children. And, there is a crime in the state of Texas for making a firearm accessible to a minor. But the government doesn't get to know what firearms you have simply because you have a child. But then for some reason, if you are having a foster care child, now they get to know, now they get to invade your privacy and see all that. It doesn't seem right.
No. We are the Armed Attorneys. Today we are talking to you about a new Texas law that went into effect September the 1st, 2025. Now this relates to kind of list building, potentially gun registry style things that we see coming from the foster system here in the state. Not no more, but before we begin, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting that like button. And I don't know where the initial obsession comes from, but it has been a problem. And it seems like every legislative session we have to rein in the foster care system here in the state of Texas because they just seem to really hate firearms.
They do. That's kind of the only area in which they can ask, well, before this, ask, how many firearms you have, what kind of firearms you have. And it's my understanding that they can actually require you to store them in a certain manner and means if you're going to be a foster care.
Yes, and so that was kind of the initial setup. And what we were seeing initially were just folks who want to be foster parents.
Right.
They want to take care of a child. They want to help out. They want to do the right thing. Effectively, some of this is ideological, being denied that because, look, they're a gun person, or God forbid they have a firearm to defend themselves should the worst thing happen ever. So, this is partially an ideological battle that has been slowly getting reined into. Hey, you can't deny fosters just because people have firearms. Well, then they're saying, oh, you need to store these firearms, ammunition separate from the firearm. Okay, well, we rein that in. They can be loaded, stored together. They can have storage requirements, though. Just that's kind of one of the last changes we had. But guns, present in the house. All right. Now, this one goes a little bit of a step further because it seemed like, and I didn't know that this was a problem, but apparently it was, these foster care agencies, the Department of Family and Protective Services, wanting a list of everyone's guns.
Yeah.
And then that information somehow ending up in the public space.
Right. So this changes that. This says that now they cannot ask for a list of firearms in the home. They can't make you tell them what firearms you keep in the home. So it's preventing the government from getting that information and putting it somewhere else, and like Richard said, kind of making a firearms registry list through the foster care system.
Yeah, so, now, I guess, just so people understand what the current state of the law is, yes, if a potential foster is asked a question, hey, are there firearms present in the household? Yeah, that is information that they can ask. Can they require that the firearm be stored, locked? Yes, the answer to that is yes. Doesn't have to be separate from the ammunition, 2 separate safes, things like that. We've gotten rid of all those crazy requirements. So, it's a step in the right direction, not perfect. But, part of this is we do not want the government having a list of every gun that we will, that we have in our collection. And potentially, like we've seen happen, the naughty Californians, these kind of, gun owner lists getting leaked to the public, these name and shame. I don't know where the shame is in this. But we're not going to be having that here in the state of Texas.
Yeah, and in Chicago, it's my understanding that you actually have to have a permit to own firearms specifically, and they keep a list of those firearms. It's my understanding. Again, I do not practice law in Illinois, but that is my understanding. And I think we saw over the weekend, the Memorial Day weekend, they had so many shootings and so many killings in Chicago. So even with that information, it doesn't prevent, potentially bad people from doing bad things. This information doesn't stop that.
Yeah, and so I wanted to go over 3 little provisions to this because an important concept in the law is, all right, what's your enforcement mechanism? If the law doesn't have an enforcement mechanism or a remedy, is it really a law at that point? So I wanted to talk about that very briefly. If the commission, department, or child placing agency contracts with the department or has obtained information relating to the types of firearms that are present in an agency foster home, the commission, department, or child placing agency may not use that information for the purpose other than determining whether there are firearms present in the house. And a child placing agency that violates this section is liable to the state for a civil penalty, an amount not to exceed $5,000 for each violation. The Attorney General may bring action to recover the civil penalty authorized under this subsection. So, bugs me a little bit when the remedy is you got to run to the attorney general, because that's gonna, if it said the attorney general shall, that would be a little bit stronger language. They say it's up to the attorney general whether they want to seek to enforce this. So I'll say there is a remedy. Is it a super strong or strong enough remedy? I don't know.
Yeah. If you are a parent, not necessarily a foster care parent in Texas, there are no requirements for how firearms have to be stored in the home. When you go to the hospital and have a child, they don't get to ask you, hey, by the way, do you have firearms in your home, just because you're giving
Those
birth.
Obama doctors might ask you.
So obviously firearms have to be stored out of the reach of children. They cannot be accessible to children. And, there is a crime in the state of Texas for making a firearm accessible to a minor. But the government doesn't get to know what firearms you have simply because you have a child. But then for some reason, if you are having a foster care child, now they get to know, now they get to invade your privacy and see all that. It doesn't seem right.
No. And so going back to, crime. Making a readily dischargeable firearm accessible to a child, that's somebody under the age of 17, that's here in the state of Texas. What we're really talking about is loaded handgun, child, not supervised. And, could they hurt themselves, others? That's the kind of thing they're looking at. If they don't hurt anybody, it's a Class C.
It is. It's a Class C. So
and
same as traffic offense.
If they hurt somebody, it's a more serious misdemeanor, Class A misdemeanor. So, all right, that's what we're looking at. I would think, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If that is going to be the prohibition that we place on everybody else, why are we treating foster families different?
Yeah, it really doesn't make sense to me. I mean, these are people who are already having to go through background checks in order to become a foster parent. So presumably, they're law-abiding people. Hopefully the government isn't putting foster children in the care of people who are out there breaking the law. So why are they getting more scrutiny than, you or I, who just go to the hospital and have a baby, or I guess stay home and have a baby? It just doesn't seem fair.
Yeah, for all of our midwife deliveries at home, right?
Exactly.
But this is a good step in the right direction. Is this the way we want the world to be? Is it perfect? Is it the firearm utopia that we envision? No, but guess what? These kind of tweaks in the law are really important. These incremental changes, identifying problems between legislative sessions, fixing them at the following legislative session. This is the kind of stuff that, it may seem like it only impacts a few number of folks. I'll tell you, it impacts probably more people than you can imagine. But if you see any of these kind of things popping out, now's the time to identify them so we could start talking to our lawmakers about, these little fixes, tweak things, get things right so that folks' Second Amendment rights are not infringed, that we're all a little bit safer. But I hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video. And don't forget to question and comment in the section down below. Until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.